What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Tech Talk with Aaron Smart Home Edition, volume number 3. As you can see, I've been quite busy. I have a whole bunch of stuff all open. This has been taken apart. I've been playing with stuff, and I have some thoughts. I have some comments I want to give you, specifically on the Sonoff ZigBee Smart Switch, the ZBMINI. So let's get into this one. I've got some thoughts, and I got to relay them to you. And in fact, actually, this is a relay, so it fits. This doesn't mean that I don't have other comments, right? I've tried the Innovelli Blue series, which I think is pretty good. I tried the Brighton simple smart switch from ZigBee. I think that's good for what it is, just a switch. That's this one right here. I actually had the Innovelli up here before. I just had to try all these things out. Tried the Third Reality Smart Plug Gen 2. I think that's okay too. Habitat is already online, so that's going just fine. But again, I got some comments. I'm probably going to make a couple of these for each of these devices. And you could consider this my first impression, really, but I think I'm done with the actual Sonoff ZBMINI. So let's get into it. The Sonoff ZBMINI, this guy right here, is an interesting device because it's fairly inexpensive and it's straightforward ZigBee. It pretty much works with Habitat out of the box, no problem. What's interesting about it is it has the ability to basically join a three-way circuit and basically have a light with regular three-way switches. In, I think, other parts of the world they call them two-way. I think I might have called it two-way by accident because I was reading the actual literature. But in America we call them three-way switches because you have 1, 2, and the third, the load itself here. Other countries call it two-way because you have two switches, two or more, I guess. There's actually a four-way switch. You can have a five-way switch, but right here is an example of a three-way switch right here. So you got two switches and a load. And I have the Sonoff right here that actually can operate in this kind of situation. However, there is something interesting about this, which we'll get into. I'm just going to demonstrate how this works. So I actually have this wired all correctly, and I'll get into that because that's where the fun begins, really. So you have two switches here. These are just three-way switches that have standard wiring hooked into here, and it operates slight delay, but that's not a big deal. So as you can see, it absolutely works fine. You can pair this with the Habitat or Home Assistant or whatever other ZigBee hub that you have, and it actually works just fine as a normal switch. This was actually the first device I ever paired with the Habitat, and it operates just as a normal switch. Basically, once this pairs, you set it to the ZigBee generic switch, and all of the functionality of a generic switch comes through here. So you'll be able to set it off, set it on, and it also will tell you when there's been a state change, basically, if it's off or on. So you can get events that way as well. The interesting part about a smart home are the events. This is where things really help when you're doing automations, because you need to know when these things actually occur. So for instance, just knowing that there's power or not is very helpful, but it's not as important as knowing when something happened, right? That there's actually a change that actually happened. I pushed something, I pushed a button, right? So that's the important part, because once you capture those events, you can do something in Habitat or whatever other system you have, Home Assistant, or I think even Philips Hue and all the other things, you can actually do something with those events. So those events are the core of what's happening in a smart home. Once you have those events, you can make rules, you can make triggers, and then fire off and have these devices actually do something in response to those events. All that being said, this device absolutely works in its intended purpose. You can actually put this in a single switch, a single pulse switch as well, which I did. So to start, this actually works absolutely fine, no problem in a single pulse switch. So down here, I have the Brighton switch right now, but don't worry about that. I had this Leviton single pulse switch in there before, and it makes it into a smart switch. It actually does. The problem is when you have it hooked up, it loses the state when you actually change it on a device that's not the actual Sonoff itself. What I mean by that is that let's just say that it's off right now and it was all wired into the single pulse switch just fine, right? Let's just say that I clicked it on, the light would turn on. The Sonoff would do all that, no problem, because I'm basically telling the Sonoff, hey, change your state. That's fine. Turn it back off, the light will turn off, Absolutely no problem. So now let's just say the switch is off, and I go on the Hubitat, and I have a rule or whatever, I manually on the Hubitat say light or switch turn on. Now the light is on and the switch is still off. And that's what I mean about the state being different. It's not a big deal, but if you're coming into a house and you see a single pole switch and it's off and the light's on, it gets a little confusing. Three-way switches, this is no big deal because it doesn't really matter. A three-way switch can be off or on depending on what the actual other switch is. So it's a little bit jarring. However, what this allows is to make this, I think this device was like $13, and this switch was like $2 and change, into a smart switch. So that's very powerful. However, it's not as useful as something like this Brighton switch or this InnoValley Blue switch right here. Even so, you basically get a smart switch under 20 bucks as long as you don't care that the state might be different than the actual single pole switch. I really don't think it's a big deal, but it's just something to consider. I probably wouldn't do it in my own house because I'll spend a little bit more money and get these type of switches, or even better, these InnoValley Blues. But still, the comparison between the Brighton regular switch and the InnoValley Blues is all about price. There's also some interesting nuances between the two in how the actual button pushes versus like this one. This one's a little bit more spongy, but this one has a lot more functionality, which we'll get into in another episode. Let's see if I can actually zoom in and show you this. You know what? Before I do that, let me turn this power off. Better be safe than sorry, right? So let's see if I can zoom in. Let's see here. Where is it? Okay, here we go. Boom. Okay, so there we go. You see that? All right, good. What am I doing here? Okay, there it is. There, you see that? Yeah, I'll move that out of the way a little bit. Right there. Okay, good. So what we have here, let me get my handy-dandy little device to actually do things. So what we have here is we have the two neutral lines, right? And they give you two because if you have an input and an output on a box, you're going to have a neutral line. So either you'd have to put a pigtail in there already, or you could just use this. So I think that's great. In fact, all these other smart switches do the same exact thing. So you don't have to pigtail the actual neutrals because they have to go into the switch anyway. So the fact is, you save a pigtail and they actually just come right into the switch. That's really, really good stuff. On the next, you've got the line in and the line out, which basically you have the load going in from the breaker or whatever you're providing power from, and the line out that goes directly to the bulb itself. I'll point to this bulb right here, but basically the bulb itself. So that's the first caveat I'm going to tell you. This thing has to be wired directly into the bulb. You see the problem that I'm coming out with? Moving on, you've got the switch ones. There's two actual terminals for each switch. So basically what that means is the actual common from one switch and the common from the other one have to go to each of these terminals right here. Do you see what I'm getting at here? These switches also still have to be wired together. We're talking about a lot of wires here. And what does that mean? Well, let's find out. I flipped this around to actually show you the wiring. So there's going to be some modifications here that you see. So here's the main, right? Two wires plus the ground coming into here. And on the back here, you have a jumper right here. That's a 3-wire, right? So you have red, black, and white, and then the ground. And then down here, goes to this box. Then down here, you have another 2-wire coming to the actual light. That's standard, right? So the actual power comes into the first switch, goes into the second switch with a 3-way wire, Romex, then goes back to a 2-wire Romex down to the light. My house was built after the 1980s. It was actually built in like the early 90s. So this is actually a representation of how my house works right now, where you have the breaker power going into the first switch, then going into the second switch, then going into the load. This is actually very common, very standard these days. It wasn't always this way. You sometimes had things, power going into this to start, power going into this one, then branching into these two. So there was no real rhyme or reason, but ever since there was a requirement to have neutrals going everywhere, generally it goes from switch to eventual load. which presents a problem because there's just not enough wires to actually hook this Sonoff device in there without running another wire. Even if you had an older place and the power was going into this directly, you still have the problem of you need to run more wires. And what do I mean by that is this switch, the Sonoff switch, actually requires two inputs to actually control the switch itself, the on-off, and then a neutral directly to the load, and then the line directly into the load. What does that mean? That means if you put it into this switch, there has to be a neutral into here directly and the line load into here directly. Period. That means it has to go through this box to this directly back into the switch itself. I'm going to put the diagram on the bottom right here, or the top. I don't know. It's going to be on the bottom or top. But basically, the wiring that I have right now, I got two wires coming into this box, right? You've got neutral and hot. Those have to find their way through this entire circuit into here all the time, but not directly. It has to plug into the Sonoff switch first, then from the Sonoff switch, then it has to come down. So basically, I just need two wires that are always there. Well, what do I have right here? I've got these two wires. So that covers the neutral and the line, the hot, right? So that's the start. So now these two wires are gone. Perfect. We've got the light covered, right? So let's run back up here into this box right here. We got those two lines coming in, and we have to somehow make it connect to here. Well, neutrals are connected all the time, right? So that's not a big deal. So now we're left with two other lines. We have the traveler, the red line between this, and then the black line. Uh-oh, that's a problem, because we've already jumped the black lines together to actually make it go into here. So all of a sudden, we only have one wire between this. That's a problem. What we need are two more wires. And as you can see, let's see here. Right here, I got two more wires that I just put in right here. So let me just see if I can push this out a little bit so that it actually shows you a little bit here. There, you see that one? I put a black one and a white one over here. These two white, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit to show you. Let's see here. Oh boy, here we go. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see this, but basically what you got here is you got this black wire here, white wire right here. Those are the two additional wires I had to put to make this switch work, and I'll explain what that means. The reason I had to run additional wires almost in any type of circuit is because you still have to hook up these three-way switches together. So, as you can see, I got these fancy Leviton switches that don't have any screws. It was like freaking me out the first time I saw them. I was like, what is going on here? But they work just fine. So these three-way switches have common, like a load or whatever they're going to call it, but this we'll call it a common, then two travelers, and then the ground on the other side. So you got traveler, the red, you got this other traveler on this other side, which is red, and the green is ground. That's fine. So basically, common on this one and the common on this one have to go into the two switch lines here. So the gray things on this Sonoff right here. So that covers those two lines. Then these two red ones here have to link to each other down here. So you need to have two lines additionally coming from each box to each other. So you have to run new wiring anyway for this to work. Even if the wiring was powering this thing first, I still think you'll need additional wires to actually come from this common or this common all the way back to here. I don't think there's a situation where this is actually going to be perfectly fine in an install that's old. Now, if you're installing this thing new, that's not a big deal. You can run everything directly to here, put this box in here, and then run enough cabling to these other boxes to cover what you need here. So this type of device, to me, is better if you actually have new work or new installations. The other thing I would actually say, again, because this can be used with a single pole switch, effectively you can make anything that you have a smart switch at any time with this, like, I think it was like 13 bucks. Or it's cheaper if you get like a 4-pack. So if you buy this, you can make all your things smart switches using ZigBee, just using your regular single pole switches. Again, you might have a little state problem because down might be off, down might be on, up might be off might be on, who knows, doesn't really matter. As long as you can live with that caveat, you got a smart switch for just the cost of this with your existing switches. This is the type of information I actually wasn't sure about when I actually read this. So again, if I open up this documentation right here, and you can see, again, I will impose this diagram, top or bottom or the sides or something. But basically when I was looking at this, I was like, oh my God, I got three-way switches in my house. I'll just make this work. I can buy a couple of these, install them in my three-way switches, and actually get a smart three-way switch system without a problem. My hopes were dashed because I realized that you have to run more wires to those switches. And now you know. And knowing's half the battle. G.I. Joe. Anyway, enough of that reference. Dating myself here. This Sonoff switch I actually like for certain purposes, and the purpose that I'm going to recommend is this single pole switch. So if you have a bunch of single pole switches in your house and you like them, you can get this like $13 device, make them ZigBee compatible, and boom, you can hook them up to Habitat or Home Assistant or whatever you actually have. For new wiring, I think this Sonoff is something to consider because you can install it and pull all the wires you need without worrying about it. If you already have a three-way setup in your house, you're probably going to have to run new wires, and that seems like a task I wouldn't do. I would just get something like this Innovelli Blue. That was the information that I wanted you to actually have. And that was the purpose of me starting the series because I had so many questions that I wasn't sure about, and I wanted you to come on this journey with me. So now that we covered this, we're going to go into more of this stuff. I actually got more stuff coming. I couldn't help myself and I bought some more stuff. But we've got a whole bunch of stuff coming. We got the Innovelli Blue, we got the Brighton switch here, we got this Third Reality Smart Plug Gen 2. Habitat is in the mix as well. A little bit about the Habitat. I think the interface can use a facelift, but it actually just works fine. I still think it could use a facelift. I think they're doing a good job though. I like the community around the Habitat. We'll see as I start to put more and more stuff on the actual ZigBee network how it actually maintains itself. This is where I ask you for assistance, right? If you have a smart home or you have other tips and tricks, please leave me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks for watching everybody. We'll see you in the next one.